Airborne operation by paratroopers is a critical part of modern warfare. It sends a relatively large number of military personnel behind enemy lines. Parachuting requires extensive training. Injury and death during training often increase non-combat personnel loss and decrease troop morale. Factors associated with parachute injuries include aircraft, fixed wing versus helicopter, and exit, side versus rear, type, loading, timing, day versus night, wind speed, and temperature. Airborne forces are ground combat units carried by aircraft and airdropped into battle zones, typically by parachute drop or air assault. Parachute-qualified infantry and support personnel serving in airborne units are also known as paratroopers. A paratrooper is a military parachutist, someone trained to parachute into a military operation and usually functioning as part of an airborne force. Military parachutists, troops, and parachutes were first used on a large scale during World War II for troop distribution and transportation. The main advantage of airborne forces is their ability to be deployed into combat zones without land passage, as long as the airspace is accessible. Formations of airborne forces are limited only by the number and size of their transport aircraft. A sizable force can appear out of the sky behind enemy lines in merely hours if not minutes, an action known as vertical envelopment. Airborne forces typically lack enough supplies for prolonged combat, so they are utilized for establishing an airhead to bring in larger forces before carrying out other combat objectives. Some infantry fighting vehicles have also been modified for paradropping with infantry to provide heavier firepower. Due to their necessary slow descent, paratroopers are vulnerable to anti-air fire from ground defenders. But combat jumps are at low altitudes, 400 to 500 ft, and normally carried out a short distance away, or directly on if lightly defended, from the target area at night. Airborne operations are also particularly sensitive to weather conditions, which can be dangerous to both the paratroopers and airlifters, so extensive planning is critical to the success of an airborne operation. Advances in VTOL technologies, helicopter and tiltrotor. Since World War II have brought increased flexibility, and air assaults have largely been the preferred method of insertion for recent conflicts, but airborne insertion is still maintained as a rapid response capability to get troops on the ground anywhere in the world within hours for a variety of missions. There is something strangely hypnotic about watching paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions perform static line jumps one by one from a C-17 Globemaster III aircraft over Sicily drop zone at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Parachutes are a critical technology used by the military in delivering personnel and cargo supplies. The United States formed its first parachute test platoon of airborne infantry in the 1940s. Since then, parachuting technology has continually advanced, as well as the way in which paratroopers jump from an aircraft. There are a few basic types of military jumps. The first is a static line or low-level, low-opening jump, also referred to as LELO. These types of jumps offer the advantage that a large number of troops can be quickly dropped into an area, but because of the low altitude, it is one of the more dangerous jumps to execute. The static line refers to the mechanism in which this type of jump is carried out. The parachute ripcord is attached to a cable running along the inside of the aircraft and unravels when the jump has been made. The weight of the paratrooper pulls against the line after they have jumped and pulls the parachute from the deployment bag. The paratrooper's weight will also break the smaller cord once the chute has been opened, allowing the jumper to separate from the static line. Static line jumps ideally mean the parachute will automatically open, eliminating the need for human interference. The second type of jump is the high altitude, low opening jump, or HALO. HALO jumps are used when the aircraft and jumpers need to stay undetected. Accuracy is extremely important in this type of jump, as the paratroopers are deployed at a very low altitude. During a HALO jump, the paratrooper will free fall at a high speed toward the landing zone. They will deploy the parachute close to the ground, allowing for minimal exposure possible. A drawback to the HALO jump is that because the aircraft must fly closer to the landing zone, it may be more vulnerable to attack. The third type of jump is the high altitude, high opening jump, or HAHO. This type of jump is used when an aircraft cannot fly over a landing zone or if the noise of the parachute would alert an enemy. Paratroopers will deploy their parachutes at very high altitudes and glide into a landing zone at a horizontal distance. They will often glide for a considerable distance in the air. This technique allows for minimal detection by an opposing force. A concern with both HALO and HAHO jumps is the possibility of hypoxia. Hypoxia is caused by oxygen deprivation. As a result, supplemental oxygen and safety procedures are required during these operations. It is time for U.S. Army Special Operations Forces to redirect effort and resources away from airborne operations toward more urgent training needs in the 2021 battle space. As an innovative organization, Army SOF is well suited to lead in modernization, economizing assets, and honing the most relevant capabilities. What better time than now to re-examine how SOF applies its resources, especially as the Department of Defense pivots to focus on Cold War 2.0. The question of airborne relevance in the Army at large is nothing new. RAND Corporation gives it thorough and favorable treatment, arguing that the capability can be adapted for the future fight. Conversely, political scientist Dr. Mark DeVore applies a robust critique on this topic in his 92-page report for the Army Press, likening airborne units to self-licking ice cream cones. Yet the brightest Army Special Ops minds have not meaningfully weighed in on the conversation, despite the role of airborne operations as a gravitational force on all SOF training calendars. The legacy arguments to keep sustained airborne operations training across the formation do justice neither to the complexity of SOF mission sets, nor to the need for adaptability and combat relevance therein. Some have defended airborne in SOF as a key part of the culture, claiming that it adds to the unit's eliteness. The reality is that these units are remarkable irrespective of airborne operations. The concept of special ops eliteness conjures ideas of unique skills and training, high intellect, performance under pressure, and extreme courage, cognition, and endurance. While these characteristics apply to some paratroopers willing to jump from the proverbial perfectly good airplane, they do not apply to everyone. In fact, the Army Airborne School produces about 14,000 paratroopers annually. A key principle of Army SOF is that special operations forces cannot be mass-produced. What makes the organization elite primarily lies outside of airborne parameters. Similarly, some airborne advocates argue that it builds a spirit de corps. Yet one can find the real bonding agent in the nature of special operations missions. Frankly, quarterly jump operations hold no candle to the sense of community built in a SOF detachment. Operators train in extremely small, tight-knit teams, leaving their families and the comforts of home to deploy to the most dangerous regions of the world and do the God's bidding. They live, work, and fight as a family in extremely challenging conditions.